Hi, my name is Shady Atia. I'm going to present today a presentation on writing a research proposal. This is a very important presentation for postgraduates in order to learn how to write a research proposal. My presentation will go through four main axes. I will present how to write what is actually a research proposal, how to define your topic, how to organize your research proposal, and finally how to write it technically and present it. Well, let's see the first question. What is a research proposal? A research proposal is a statement of intent where you describe your intentions. And simply we can describe it into a motivational intention manuscript where you declare your intentions and show your motivations. And it's very important in this sense that you define the scope of your topic, the subject enough. It has to be specific enough. And you have to have a specific aim and objective related to your topic. And definitely it would reflect your interest and it should be your own research. So therefore you should also explain why is this topic better than other topics, and you have to show that this is a first-time subject that will be innovative, not previously addressed in a way, and that you will carry that responsibility and present it through the research proposal. Well, the next question comes to what are the types of research proposal that we have? Many people get confused about that. We have a research proposal that is mainly under a thesis. A thesis is mainly a manuscript that you write for a master degree, and it answers a research question based on existing knowledge. And here we are looking to your capacity to critical think and analyze deep information and process that and present it as new knowledge. While there is another type of a manuscript that is called dissertations. The dissertations, they are mainly for PhD doctoral degrees, and in this sense you have to create a significant new contribution to knowledge, and you have to come up with a new solution for a problem or a cure for a certain contextual problem. Well, there is a third type of research proposal that you could write for funding grants, like the Belgian research institutes, or you write it for national research organizations in order to go through a competition process to win a funding to cover a research topic. Okay? Well, these are the three types of proposal that you can write. Next, I will move to the second important question. How to define your topic. This is not an easy task because you are most probably not having large experience with doing research, and sometimes it's very difficult to do that. So in this sense, you have to define your topic, and the process should start by identifying a general idea or an area of research, and then develop it and focus on a certain research question. So you have to ask yourself the following question. Is the topic related to real life? Because we are looking to applied science, we are looking at applied research. So you have to make sure that this is related to real life. When you answer this question, you have to come to the next question. Is your topic related to societal problem? Is it a really problem in the society that your research is addressing? Is your topic going to be useful and interesting? Or did someone before answer it? So you must make sure that the topic is useful and interesting. Is your topic focused and specific, or is it very broad and large? The more the topic is large and generic, the more it's difficult to come up with something new. It's difficult to process the work. Can your idea fill a gap in research? Do we have a problem or a topic that was not addressed previously by another researcher? So you have also to make sure that your research topic is not a kind of common topic that has been processed by many people. Always you must look for a gap or something that is missing and make sure that your research will cover that area. And definitely you should ask yourself, will this study generate new knowledge? And this is very important because when you generate new knowledge, then you have a real contribution and your research is worthy. And you should also ask, would the benefit from it, the architects, the engineers, the professional in your field, is it going to advance the understanding or influence policy? This is very important. And definitely, finally, you should ask yourself, will this study fill a gap in existing knowledge or resolve current controversies? So these kind of series of questions, you can use them as a kind of checklist, as a starting approach after defining a general topic you are interested in, and go step by step trying to answer them until you can define and shape your research topic. Well, there is some golden rules you should keep in mind while defining your research topic. You must be passionate about the topic because it should come from you. It should be your interest that you are related. You might ask your supervisor or follow a previously developed idea or concept from your supervisor or your professor, but in the same time you must have the passion related to this topic. So this is very important. The second golden rule is related to the discoveries. Is the topic, could the topic lead to discoveries? You should not promise to guarantee a discovery, but you should have a kind of estimation this could topic lead to discoveries or not. And you have to make sure that this is catchy topic. It catch the attention. People will be interested in it. It's grabby. It's really related to society. People will really would like to listen to what you are going to present and read it through your manuscripts. And definitely you have to formulate very clearly your objectives and aims so that you are focused in your research and having a very specific topic. And finally, you should select a supervisor, he or she that can help you through this process and has the ability and the skills to guide you through the process. So these are kind of 5 golden rules I would like to highlight. You must follow them to make sure that you are on the right track. Now, after describing what is a research proposal and how to do it, I would start to talk about the content. The content is very important. Many people don't know how to write a proposal, what should be the order of the information. And here are kind of 10 major elements you should focus on in writing a research proposal. You should cover issues related to the title and the keywords related to your research topic, a brief abstract describing your topic, a problem statement, aims and objectives, the significance and importance of your topic and the audience that your research is catering for, the state of the art, the methodologies, your expected results, and definitely you should describe the project outline and the impact and the biography of your research. Well, let's start with these, and I'm going to describe everyone into detail. Well, when I'm talking about title and keywords, this is very important. Why? Because a title and a keyword is not an easy task. A title in general should be catchy and should be precise. So these are some rules that you should follow to have a good title. It has to be a specific title, accurate, not too long, catchy, and it has to contain the main idea. I should read the title and figure out most probably what is this thesis about or what is this dissertation about. So you have to look at the title in a way and revise it and think about it. And most of the time, good titles start with an action verb. Let's say like simulation of, comparison of, assessment of. These are all examples that you can look at and start with them your title. Once you have an action verb, it shows already that you are trying to do something to cater or to address a certain problem. And most of the time, a researcher doing a master thesis or a PhD thesis or even a research for grant proposals, he or she should look at these verbs as a starting to identify and formulate their title. Well, once you are done with your title, that's not enough. You have to define next to the title keywords. Well, you will ask, what's the point? I just defined the topic and I have a title now. Why should I use keywords? Well, keywords are very important. They should not exceed 6 to 8 words. And actually, we use terminologies or we use words that are not in the title. In this sense, you are helping the search engine to extend the topic. So let me give you an example. My topic of my research is called Dynamic Building Kit for Adaptable and Reusable Wall Solutions. That's the title. The title is talking about developing a building kit that could be adaptable, that could be assembled and disassembled for materials or building components that could be reused, okay? And specifically on walls. This is the title and I understand it like that. Well, I can add to that some keywords. These keywords can help me to describe more. I can say that I'm talking about design solutions. I'm talking specifically on post-war housing. I can add a context or a city to describe where I am, Liège in this case, I can add the keyword energy efficiency, renovation. Like that, I am extending my title and amending additional words that can help in the understanding of topic. And once you do a research with these keywords, the topic will pop up in the search engine much easier. So actually, this is very important to define your keywords associated with your topic, and in this sense, they are very complementary. Well, the next step is to move to the abstract. Well, the abstract is one of the things you do at the end, so you don't start with an abstract. But let me tell you first what is an abstract. An abstract simply is a text, a piece of text that is not longer than 250 words, and it describes simply your topic, the research problem, the objectives, the methodology, your results, and the audience and the impact of your work. So simply, the abstract should be read by somebody in less than 3-4 minutes. He or she can directly grasp the whole overview of your topic. So you summarize the essence of your whole master thesis or PhD thesis in 250 words. And therefore, it should be really well thought, well written, and following this structure. Well, let me give you an example. Here is a topic related to health. The topic title is called The Effect of Exposure to Natural Environment on Health Inequalities, an Observational Population Study. As we can see, those words are not exceeding 250 words. We have a background statement, just 2 sentences. We have a methodology fully described where it has been done, what is the population size, the sampling, and finally we find the findings talking about this observational study results with some statistical analysis and the rates the study that the rates of the study, and finally we have to look at the final 2 sentences talking about interpretation. In this sense, this is an abstract. It's compact, but it's describing the whole study into a systematical approach. So this is actually you do when you finish your thesis, you write your abstract in order to communicate to people, and actually when you publish your work, only your abstract will be an open source, and then after that, when a researcher looking on internet, they will be interested by your topic, by title, by keywords. Then they will go through your abstract. If they find the topic interesting, they find interesting findings and interpretation, they come up with the idea of investing in reading the whole manuscript or ordering the master thesis from another library or from another country. Okay, so this is very important to start with after defining the title and the keyword. The third step is mainly related to the problem statement. And here we are really starting the real work, the serious work related to the research proposal. Well, what is a problem statement? You must start in your problem statement to contextualize your problem, and you have to be concise. You have to define exactly what's the problem. And most of the time, it's good to link your background problem with authorities. So you start by saying the European Union has this objective, the national government has this objective, the region or the province or the city has these objectives. So you relate your background and the problem with political, governmental, or non-governmental, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, whatever authority that is stating something related to the topic. Also, it's important to quantify this information and quantify the background. So it's advised here to define the problem into numbers, give some statistics, some figures related to the issue, and you must also contain an overview of most relevant work. You should also try to cover others' work, saying in this context of this problem, those stakeholders are doing that, or covering this problem or addressing it from an angle or another. It's also important here to describe clearly your hypothesis that you have been done and how you are going to enter to propose the problem. Well, after describing this background and preparing the reader for the topic, you can directly now start to propose the problem, and you have to show a really significant problem that is related to a topic. So you should not make the reader get lost. On the opposite, you should start to define a statement clearly and make sure that it's a societal problem in a certain context. Well, this is an example. Just remember that at the end of the day, a research proposal, maybe in a master's thesis or a dissertation, you will get funding, or sometimes you don't get funding, you do it work for free. But at the end, no one will fund a research proposal or find it reasonable as long it's not solving local or global problems. So my advice in writing a research proposal, make sure that your problem definition is by default solving a local or a global problem, trying to solve it in a way or another, linking to reality, linking to statistics, putting some figures, variables, and contextualizing the problem, describing it in a way that is viable, up-to-date, related to our current practice. Once you are done with that, you can start to define your aim and objectives, and you should take into account that an aim is not an objective. An aim is like a bullet. It's very important to define your aim. Once you define a good aim, you are sure that you will do a good research. So, aim well, and you should hit your target cleanly. If you don't write a clear aim that is targeting a specific goal, you'll not succeed in doing your research. And simply you have to say what you want to simply and directly want to say. You have to explain what is this research going to do and who will benefit from it. I will give you some examples related to aims, but keep into account it has to be short, it has to be to the point, and it's like a bullet. You don't need to write a lot. It's the shorter, the better. Well, what's the definition of an aim? An aim simply provides an answer to a general problem. So far we are not talking about the specific problem. This is the objective. In an aim, I'm talking about the general problem. And the aim goes along with an adjective. It has to be concise. You should be aware that your grandmother can read the aim and understand it. And you should also keep in mind that it should be related to what's motivating you. So this is very important, and it should assist on improving the decision lead. This is very important. Some examples of aims, you can have a look. Lowering the dependency or the dependence on fossil fuel. Increasing the energy efficiency of, improving the situation of, increasing renovation rate, dissemination knowledge, sharing information, general overall aims related to a serious problem. And in this sense, you don't need to write it more than one sentence maximum, and then you are describing the topic in general, in a sense, in an aim that a non-technical person can understand it. When I say here, my aim of my research is to increase energy efficiency in the building sector, this is a very broad, generic aim anybody can understand. And that's the purpose. You should have this aim. Now, once you define the aim, you can now be more specific and focus on the objective. But let me tell you what's the objective. The objective is more specific to your study. It's more accurate than the aim, and it's operational. So there is an action in it. You have to do something in it. In the aim, in the objective also, it has to correspond to what you will try to produce and generate. So it has to be very precise in description. It has to focus on the central research question and often contextualize it to a specific climate, context, country, region. Very important. And these are some examples for objectives. So here I'm saying my objective to develop a software or a program to calculate turbulent nonlinear equation. Here the objective became very clear. Analyze the reason of low renovation rate. Identify barriers. Understand, study the impact of, assess, compare. So the objective has to be very clear, very precise, to the point, talking about a specific aspect. So in general, it should be combined with the aim. But let me give you an example with a good description of an aim with an objective. Well, have a look and read this sentence. Sorry. Just have a look. I have an aim here. The main aim of this research is to disseminate technological knowledge on adaptive facade at a European level. That's the overall aim, very general. I want to spread or share information related to a specific type of building facades in Europe and do it on a European level. So this is a very broad aim, and this is very successful. One sentence, like a bullet. Now, how I'm going to do this aim? I need to describe at least 3-4 objectives to do this aim. First of all, I'm aiming to increase knowledge sharing. Secondly, I'm looking to develop a new knowledge. Thirdly, I'm starting new collaboration. So in this sense, I am precisely describing how I'm going to achieve this aim through operational, tactical objectives. Another example could be interesting here. Have a look at that. The project is aiming to improving building energy labeling schemes. So I would like to improve the labeling of buildings. So like you buy any food product, you have a label telling what's the ingredients. I want to improve the labeling of buildings. But how I'm going to do that? These are the objectives that I'm going to do. I'm going to review different building labeling. I'm going to review different performance indicators. I will investigate possibilities for developing other labels. I will choose some case studies. I will examine the robustness of labeling schemes. I will evaluate their social acceptance. I will analyze the results. I will create a fair framework. Directly, you can see that we have here at least something around 8 objectives serving one aim. So it's very important in your research proposal to keep this structure in your writing. You have an overall overarching aim with a very specific objectives that serves to achieve this aim. And as I told you, it has to be operational with adjectives. Also a criteria to make sure that your objectives are well or right, good written. We call objective SMART. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. Every reviewer reading your research proposal, he or she will look at these objectives. Are the objectives specific? Are they measurable? Are they attainable, realistic, and time-bound? And this is very important. You have to make sure that you have a pointed topic, you are covering it, you can measure the objective and measure what you are doing. You must make sure that you can reach these objectives and that you have a realistic objective. It's not a dream. You have calculated the time and the effort, and you can do it, and definitely it should be time-bound. So you must put it in a frame of a deadline with a certain start and an end date. Once you make sure that your objectives are SMART, you can pass now and validate your topic, and in this sense you can look to the topic and say, I have SMART objectives, and you need some time to do it. It's not easy to write it, but you need just to take some time, brainstorm your topic. Once you defined well the problem, you can then define good the aim, and from the aim you can break it down into a specific objective. This is how it works. Another final advice for the aim and objective: don't forget to frame it. You need always to frame it. So these are the questions you should ask yourself at the end of writing your aim and objective. So first question, is it worth it answering your research question and the aim? What will benefit? Am I going to benefit from it? Is the society, the community, the professional or the scientific community going to benefit from it? Is it specific, your aim and objective? Are they answerable? Can we answer them in this frame of a thesis or a dissertation? Is the topic original? Original, is it contribution to knowledge? Did somebody else do it, or I'm really doing something new? What about the outcomes? Are they appropriate? Do they think ahead? Are the expected outcomes really achievable? This is very important. And finally, you should ask yourself, is this topic interesting to you? There's many students who start a thesis and after a while they say, I don't like this problem, I don't like this topic. They stop. This means that you are not certain, that you are motivated, you are passionate, and this topic is for your own personal interest, is triggering you. So these are some important advices to validate and to make sure that your aims and objectives are well written. And this is a very fast example. You can have a look for a winning proposal. This is simply an example showing the specific, measurable and attainable, realistic, time-bound objectives. You can see here I have a precise problem. Agriculture is the backbone of Belgium's economy, for example, and it's central to the government development strategy. But although the agricultural sector employs more than 75% of countries' workforce and accounts both directly and indirectly for approximately 51% of countries' Belgium's gross domestic product, little is known about the scale of livestock farming, livestock diversity, or distribution of livestock farms. So here I have a problem, very specific, well described. It's contextual. There's a background on the national level. I find some figures and statistics, and the researcher simply wanted to say one thing. We don't have information about the livestock farming in this country. But instead of writing it directly, he put a context, he gives some numbers, he put some figures, he shows the importance of the topic, and right after he will or she starts to write the objective. So the objective here is not an aim, he is directly talking about operational specific task. A team of 8 researchers, defining who will do that, 8 researchers at the Livestock Research Unit of Agricultural College, for example at Liège University, will research the types and extent of livestock farming in the country. A comprehensive report will be published and an online database and website will be created. The project will be presented in its entirety 4 years after the start of the project at the Sub-Saharan Agricultural Summit in Botswana in November 2016. So you have here a very clear, objective, operational, with steps following up, and I can measure it, it's specific, it's attainable, it's realistic, it's time-bound. So this is the way how to write a good research aim and a research objective, and this will be the start of your research proposal. And just to remind you, keep in mind that in the beginning of your research proposal, you have to have a catchy and informative title. The summary and the abstract, leave it for the end. You will not do it when you start. This is after you finish. Write your 6-8 keywords that are not included in your title. Make sure that you have a good problem statement description with a problem related to contextual societal issues. Define an overall aim and go for your operational step-by-step specific objectives. In this way, if you keep this slide in mind while developing your first part of your proposal, you are on the road to success. Well, I'm done with the aims and objectives, and I will move to the 5th component or element, which is the significance and audience. It's very important in research to define why is this research important and who are the users of this research, who are the end users who should benefit from this study. Am I doing this study for myself, for fun? You should not do that at university. Even though that some people try to do explorational work, you can do it, but you should just succeed in translating your own interest into a common interest. Once you did it, you are on the track. So the significance is meant the importance here. So you have to make sure and describe in your text what is the added value, what is original about this work, why is it important. Even if some people are not finding it important, you have to defend the work and present it and write it in a way that is important. Something you should show that this is something that was never did before, and once you contextualize your topic, you succeed to have a significance. For example, if I'm talking about renovation using prefabricated units, or if I'm talking about prefabricated housing, once you open or would like to research topic, you might get some feedback saying, yeah, but prefabricated construction, there is many countries who do it, in the United States, in Canada, it's nothing new. But once you contextualize it, you can make it new. If you say studying prefabricated housing in Liège, or in Wallonia, or in Belgium, or in the province X, or in the region X, or for residential housing, or for a specific context, for a specific region, once you contextualize a topic, you directly make it original. So there is many topics in your society, in our context here at Liège universities, maybe there is advancement in Finland or in other European countries, but they are not contextualized. So you can also borrow ideas from abroad, from other researchers, and contextualizing and study how to implement them in our context here. Once you do that, your topic becomes significant and important and becomes unique because we don't have answers for that. Also, it's important that does not mean that the question is new but never approached like you. Even some researchers, they select a topic that has been selected or researched by many people before, but you can show that how you will do it in a unique way, how you will go through a personal endeavor that looks differently to process the topic. So don't be afraid and saying, yeah, when you look at the depository of previous master thesis, if you find somebody else before you did the same topic that you are interested in, you should not stop. Take the topic, read it well, and see how you can do it different. Once you define this difference and set it as a significant, as added value, you can guarantee that your research topic is significant and important. Also, your topic should lead to added value. At the end of the day, you should add value and make sure that you have important, and significance has to take into account account of the principal aim. It should be at the end related to your principal aim. Some other questions you could look at. Questions have to be open in general. When you describe your topic, here you can add a list of keywords not included in the title, and the motivation is linked to the context. Well, defining the significance is important. Now you defined your problem, your title, your aim, your objective. Why is this topic is important? How is it significant? Now comes a very important topic people forget about, and I think personally you might start by that. The audience. Why are you doing this study? Who is going to benefit from this study? Who you want to reach. Define your target audience very clearly and from the beginning. The easier the target audience is described, the easier you can do your research. Many people forget that it could be politicians, your target could be professional community, it could be the research community, it could be managers, it could be whoever community or stakeholders. But leaving your research proposal without defining the audience, there is no meaning, because many people do interesting studies, but then they don't contact their audience. If I'm doing a study, for example, about the green area spaces in Liège city, so I want to know how much green area per square meter per citizen is in the city of Liège. And I did a very beautiful analysis, and I went through the neighborhoods of Liège, and I then identified through my analysis how much square meter of green spaces are available for the citizens of Liège. If at the end of this study I did not contact the community or the local authority of Liège city or the province and tell them, here is my work, how can you benefit from them? If I didn't go and do an interview with them, if I didn't contact them to make sure that the municipality is benefiting from the study, then I failed to connect my research to the audience. So you must always to make sure what's the research, and ask yourself what's the relation between my research topic and the audience, and did I allow the audience to intervene in my study? In this sense, I should have maybe went to the municipality and asked the urbanism sector or unit and tell them, I'm doing a study about Liège, can you help me with this information? Is this information for you helpful? How can this information, can I modify it to meet a kind of certain requirement from your side? So it's very important to define the audience and not to define it theoretically on paper. No, you have to go engage with those people, contact them before starting your study, during your study, and after your study. You can even invite them to your defense. If you don't do this step, our research will have no impact. It will be just theoretical research hidden in research university without having any impact on society. So therefore, make sure always what is the audience of your research, get in contact with these people, and as I told, why you have to reach those people, because you have to consider your motives and why you feel this group should be targeted. You have to know why you want to reach a particular group, and you should provide insight that will help develop effective study. And you should say also, why should they be interested in my research? This is very important. Once you define that, you can start now your research. I'm moving now to the step number 6, but I would say that this is the first chunk of your research proposal. It does not need to be more than 1 or 2 pages, defining clearly from the title, going to the keywords, talking about your problem statement and the background, defining the aim and objective, the significance of your work, and finally the audience. Once you define this 1 or 2 pages, I can guarantee you that you have a good topic, well defined, and make sure that you revise it with your supervisor. Well, you are now ready to embark and start your topic more clearly, but you have to describe another additional component in your proposal. The state of the art or the literature review. What is the state of the art? Why do we do a research related to state of the art? Why do we review literature for a research proposal? Number one, you have to improve your own understanding. You have to understand, you have to become an expert, because now you are talking about a topic, you don't know enough information about it, so you have to understand what has been done before and you have to read the literature. So number one, why we do a literature review? To improve the understanding. Number two, you have to build your expertise in the specific domain. Number three, you have to demonstrate knowledge and show that you understand a specific knowledge related to the topic, and you have to update the reader with the state of the art, because at the end of the day, the master thesis or the PhD, you will submit it to a jury or a reader, or you will set it online, and you would like the community to read it. Once they read it, they must make sure that they are up to date to the latest information related to this topic, and therefore we should do a literature review. To do a good literature review, you must guarantee that you have good resources. You should look at major published work, you should look at a narrow specific topic, and you should start your review. The review should cover the major concepts, snapshots, relationships, classifications, and extractions. So the literature review actually is like an essence. You go through different publications, different sources, and you extract the most important information, and you provide me with a snapshot, with a pattern image describing what has been done before, what are the major publications related to this topic, and like that you can put me up to date related to the topic. One of the criteria that anybody would like, a professor will look at a research proposal, will ask, does the proposal advance the state of the art? Does it introduce innovative approaches? This is very important. And the more you go into this, a PhD or a grant proposal, the more the answer for these questions is very important. Is the proposal does it show a good understanding of the major work? Does it identify the gaps of existing knowledge? And so on. So this is very important, and you should also say what is currently available in Liège, in Belgium, in Europe, and worldwide. So this is the aim of the literature review, to make sure what is done also in the North America, what's done in Asia, to make sure that I am up to date related to this topic. Well, you should also capture the major concepts and ideas related to research. And finally, you should ask yourself, how is your research you are doing compared with similar research in other contexts. So you should not only describe your research topic and forget that others maybe did the same idea. 90% of ideas are not new. We are processing others' ideas. So 90% of ideas are not new. So you should keep in mind, put an assumption in your mind that maybe somebody else, somewhere else tried to address the same problem. What about looking, exploring, how did those other people do my work? So this is the aim of literature review, to make sure that I cover the literature, I am up to date, I am covering the major concepts and publications that describe the topic, and also similar studies related to my research topic. Once you did that, you can move to the methodology, and the methodology should describe how you are going to do your research in the proposal. And this should not be a long text. It could be a couple of paragraphs, or maybe maximum 3 paragraphs describing how you are going to do your research. There is in general different methodologies. You can do strategical research, you can do applied research, you can do experimental research, and these are all examples of researchers that you can do. If you like to do lab work and monitoring, then it's experimental work. If you would like to do applied, then it's more like simulation, case studies, system analysis, comparison analysis. If you are looking to develop concepts, model, standards, prototypes, solutions, you are more into strategical basic research. And definitely if you are looking for developing things beyond applied research, pure basic research, a theory, an equation, a philosophy, then you are looking at basic research. So you should define clearly what is your methodology, and these are all examples for different methodologies, as you can see, and every researcher and every specialization, every group of specialization has its own collection of methodologies they use. People in social sciences, we know that they use a lot interview and they use surveying techniques. This is their methodology they come up with. People working in engineering, for example, they go more for experimentation, and so on and so forth. So you must make sure your domain, your expertise, your field of expertise, what are the common methodologies? In the field of architecture or buildings in general, we use analysis research, development research, we do a lot case studies research, evidence-based design, parametric research, optimization, also participatory or action research, operational research, post-occupancy evaluation, lab research, and system analysis research. So just you must be familiar with these types of methodology and describe them in your research proposals. And now I will move to another thing, which is called a method, which means that like in the aims and objective, there is an aim and there is an objective. Here there is something called methodology and method. A method is a small action of research done to achieve a methodology. For example, I can have a case study as a methodology, but in order to achieve this methodology, I have several methods that I can do. I can do some drawings, photography, videotaping, visualization, sketching, mapping, process analysis, technology review, history review. These are all methods that I can use in my research to achieve my methodology. So it's very important in your research proposal that you define in the beginning your research methodological on this level. Is it basic research? Is it strategical? Is it applied? Is it experimental? Then you pick up a methodology and don't hesitate. You can have several methodology in a research. You can combine evidence-based design with case studies. There is no problem at all. But once you define your methodology, you have to pick up a collection of methods. A systematic review is a method. Data analysis is a method. GIS or simulation, visualizing, classification and categorization, these are all methods. So your research proposal should address these methods, and simply your methodology in general should describe how are you going to approach your work. So, as I said, you start with a literature review, and from the literature review you see what has been done by previous researchers. You have to outline the instrument, fix boundaries of the thesis, and you should look at different methodology, describe them well, make sure that you have qualitative and quantitative approaches for your methodology, and make sure how you will collect the information, how this information will be robust. I give you a very important example here you should keep into account. When we talk about methodology, one of the big problems we see today in research, the methodology should be replicable, which means that any independent researcher is going to do the same research you have been doing. He or she should be able to repeat the same methodology and come up with the same research. One of the problems we find today in research, very common, that researchers, they do the research without describing it well, without a clear methodology, and as a consequence, the results are fake because they didn't have a methodology. And once you describe your methodology, keep into account that it should be replicable and repeatable by others. So this is very important, and how to present a methodology, this is how to do it. You have to come up with a study design. A study design is simply a specific plan or a protocol for conducting the study. And it allows you to investigate and translate the conceptual hypothesis into operational research. So actually, in this section of methodology, I should see this overview design. I'm saying that my methodology is based on quantitative and qualitative research methods. I have here case studies and so on and so forth, and I here have my own other quantitative approaches, and you draw it into a sort of diagram, and this is another representation. I have descriptive analysis, I have analytical, here I'm going to do a survey, here I'm going to do experiment, here I'm going to do a cross-sectional analysis. Once you think about your methodology and represent it in a graph like that, and describe it into a couple of paragraphs, you are done with the methodology. It's accessible, and I have a very interesting document. You can ask me for it. It describes the different research methodologies in architecture. So you can go from theoretical research, interpretative research, experimental, survey, simulation, qualitative, even action research. And for each of these methodologies, there are different ontological assumptions, epistemological assumptions also, methodologies, how you validate, how you have examples for each of those. So this is very important, very helpful. You might use it. And I would like to ask you to start your methodology by sketching, drawing, thinking about picking up some methods, making sure how you will address it. You have to define your method, your sample, your case studies. What are the target users? Are you going to use equipment, analysis? This is very important. And you can draw a study design scheme for that. And the study design scheme, like I showed you, based on this analysis using this Excel or this table I provided previously. Make sure that you draw a study design scheme and integrate it in your proposal. Discuss it with your supervisor. Explain why it is the most appropriate to effectively answer your research question. And you have also to explain what alternatives have been considered when and why these have been disregarded. So these are the golden rules for the methodology. Don't forget, you have to come up with a study design scheme, describe your methodology on the level of what is the strategical level of your research, what is the methodologies you are using, what are the methods, and summarize it into a scheme and present it and describe it. Well, now I would like to move to the expected results. Even in a research proposal, before doing your research, you should describe your expected results. This is very important. And how are you going to do that? It's mainly based on your literature review. If you are going to read some major publication related to your topic, you can be able to expect what will be the results of your work. You may grab fragments from other studies, but you can predict possible outcomes, and that's all what you are expected to report in this sense. You have to be based on the literature review, linked to the aims and objectives, explain what you will be producing, something concrete, evidence-based with numbers. You have to define how is it going to be usable. Is it some rules of thumb? Is it findings? Is it guidelines? Is it advice? Is it a strategy? What it is. And for example, you can say we're going to come up with a prototype, with a design concept, with a solution. These are all important to define in the expected results. So it's not here meant that you will say exactly what will come out from the study, but you will define what parameters, what outcomes you are looking at. And these are examples of outcomes. You must keep into account that you answer this question, very important, in your research proposal. Because if you are just putting facts, they are called data. If you are classifying them, they can become information. They will become only knowledge if you are adding an analysis, an interpretation, kind of working the information into a useful information. And once you have knowledge, you can help in decisions. And actually, that's the cycle of knowledge. So your thesis is mainly looking to collect the data and information and process them to generate knowledge, so that this knowledge can help the community and the decision makers to take decision and become more informed, more knowledgeable. Well, what could be examples of outcomes? This is a series of outcomes. It could be a product, rules of thumb, guidelines, a manual, a website, an application, even an app. Don't hesitate to develop an app for your master thesis. This could be interesting. A map, a tool, a website, a program, a book, an infographic, a cartographic guide, equation, model, benchmark, simulation, a checklist. Sometimes some students come up with their master outcome, a checklist, a policy, a strategy, a theory. You must be sure that you come up with a concrete outcome that you will present at the end of your thesis, and you link this outcome to the audience as described previously. So this is very important. And to validate that you have good expected result, describe how the work will be validated. You are you must make sure that your outcomes and what you are going to present will be compared with results published in other works. Are you going to use a user group or a case study to test this outcome? Because it's not enough to tell me I will come up with a map or a tool and then it was not used by anyone or it was not tested by anyone. Make sure that you have a validation process, and in the validation process you have some groups or users who make sure that your outcome that you use was developed for them in a useful way. And you should look for internal and external validity of your result. If this research is repeated by someone else, would they get the same results you did or not? Is your work accurate enough? Do you have a systematic approach? Can the result be generalized in another similar context? These are interesting discussion questions that you can use to develop your final conclusion later in the thesis, but also you could address them in your proposal writing to make sure that you are not only looking to produce an information and throw it without making sure that it works, that it functions, that will have an effect and impact. Well, by that I am approaching almost the end. Now you have described those major topics from the keywords until the research results and outcomes. Now it's time to talk about outline and talk in the language of professional language. Professional language, this is not a research topic, this is more related to professionalism, and any institution should talk about it. Once you go through any professional document, you must develop an organizational chart. An organizational chart, it's a chart that tells me what are the parts and the component of your research or your research thesis. In this sense, you should have a description of your chapters. Maybe you can put your chapters, you can put the topics you are talking about, and it should represent your work, and it should predict the possible progress of your work. So here I'm drawing all the components of my research in one diagram. In French we call it organigramme. In English it's called the organizational chart, and any research proposal must include an organizational chart to describe the components of the work and the main work packages that you will do, and in every work packages I have associated activities. This is very important to clarify the topic. I have many master students, they come up at the end of their master thesis and they are not able even to write a structure or a table of content of their own thesis. Why? Because they didn't do an organizational chart. Once you do it early enough, you know that you will start with an introduction chapter, you will have something about a methodology, what are your case studies, your results, what will be the validation part, what will be your conclusion part, the discussion. So therefore it's very important. It's also important to be added, you can add it in the annex of your research proposal, don't hesitate to do that. And you should use it also to discuss with your supervisor in the beginning, how are you going to proceed with your master thesis or your PhD dissertation. Very important to include it. Another important organizational chart related to the professional work, the Gantt chart. Any master student graduating from Liège University, he or she must know what is a Gantt chart, because without that you are not going to be able to process tasks on long term. A Gantt chart is a professional diagram. It is a methodology used to define milestones and work packages and activities. And in this sense you describe your work in sufficient details and you set up deliverables, steps, deadlines. Very important. More detailed than the organizational chart. So if you look at the organization chart, it's mainly chunky. It's looking at big scale component of your research, while here you are going more into detail. And it's very important to be also placed in the annex of your research proposal. As you can see, here is a list of activities. Here is the master thesis. It takes an average in Liège 4 months. I can define every month in 2 weeks and define with these dark bars when I'm going to do the literature review, the interviews, the case study analysis, the simulation work, when I'm going to start to write my thesis. Very important to do that as early as possible to make sure that you go psychologically through the process of your thesis writing. Because if you leave everything till the end, you will be improvising. And improvising, you can never become professional with improvisation as long as you have a lot of time. And in fact, you don't have time. You must write your thesis to graduate. So this is the best way to do it as early as possible, and try to explore previous master theses of older students who graduated and see how they did it, to make sure that what could be the tasks and activities that you must come up and how much time they will take. Some people would say, I will do a literature review in 2 months. In reality, it might need 3 months. Maybe it will need 8 weeks. You never know. 6 weeks. You never know. So it's very important to have this translation into deliverables, steps, and time. And it's very important, once you finish this, that you have a section in your research proposal called project outline. The project outline. You link it to the organizational chart, and you link it to your Gantt chart, and your proposal must describe where are you going to start. You say when are you going to start, what steps are you going to do, and where are you going, where are you heading to, where will you get to, how you will get there. Very important. If you don't do this in the project outline, the certainty that you will do successful work is very weak. So make sure that you have defined the step of your research. You say where you're starting, describe what's the problem, the literature review, where are you heading, and make sure that you will describe that accurately and what are the final aim to go for. The last step that you should look at, before leaving that, I just forgot to say that you should describe every milestone into activity, description, and evidence of progress. The last thing you should look at is the impact and biography. This is the last part of your proposal and the last element that you should address in your proposal. And the impact and first I will start with the impact. It's very important to identify, does the proposal clarify clearly how it is relevant and realistic on the short term and long term. By definition, impact is the effect or influence on short term to long term scientific, technological, or socio-economical changes produced by a research, directly or indirectly, intended or unintended. And you should ask yourself, are the impacts identified by the proposal relevant to the society at large? Can the impact be listed and realistically achieved? And let me give some example. The impact should be able to be explained. It is different from the objective, and it's the only way to do an impact is to publish your work. Because if I'm going to spend maybe 6 months of my life on a manuscript for a thesis, or maybe 4 years for my PhD work, if this document is going to be in the depository of the library of Liège University, no one on earth will access it. Even it's not on Google. So forget about it. The only way to make sure that your work has an impact and other researchers and other professionals and the society in large is going to access it, read it, benefit from it, is to publish the work and study or look at the impact of your work. Here is an example of a work. I will read you this very fast. Energy certification labels increases the awareness of energy consumption and enables consumers to compare buildings, therefore providing builders with an incentive to improve energy efficiency in buildings. Improving energy efficiency in building is one of the most cost-effective way across all sectors to reduce energy consumption and hence greenhouse emissions. Energy efficiency is the most cost-effective method to improve energy security. From the household perspective, energy efficiency seems to be profitable. You are telling how energy efficiency or the labels are used, how is this impact of this topic. Energy efficient lighting and appliances can save about €465 per year per household in energy bills. Much more savings can be easily ensured when the whole building is energy efficient. The energy efficiency of buildings can only be guaranteed by creditable building energy label. So here you are describing what is the impact of your research. You are saying that while studying the labeling of buildings, already I can promise to have a cost-effective savings and I can guarantee a security and independence from fossil fuel. And you try to quantify it with some example, saying that, for example, a building that has an energy label A, for example, can save up to €465 per year. So you give an example. So this is a very important aspect that you should include. What would be the impact of your study? And this is difficult. You have to brainstorm. You have to think, if I come up with my research and I publish it, could it be useful? Examples for dissemination activities also to spread. Dissemination means spreading your research findings. Is there a clear or attainable plan for dissemination for your results? This is a question. Is the dissemination plan targeted, clear, and attainable? Is it relevant and you have a clear exploitation of the results? These are all important topics, and you can disseminate your work by publishing it, by having internal seminars, regular reporting, publication, conferences, exhibition, or reaching out, communicating with the community. If you go to an NGO and tell them, I would like to present my master thesis to you, I would like to share with you my document. These are all important activities you must guarantee to make sure that you are disseminating your knowledge. In a PhD, it's very important to do a lot of effort to disseminate the information. In a master thesis, it would be enough to publish in a conference or publish in a journal your results, and this is the only way to validate and make sure that your information now is available to the public, it's accessible, and it could be shared and become beneficial to the society. Last part is the biography. In your research proposal, you should include a bibliographical sector. You should have references cited in a specific format. In my lab, I prefer the APA standard, and I have a presentation on that, but you should make sure that many reviewers, they go at the end of your research proposal and read the biography, and based on the quality of biography they find, they started to say this is a good research or not. This means that the more you are describing the key publication related topic, it means that you did your homework, you read, and you should pay attention how you write it, because there are rules in citation. You should write, for example, the family name, and then the year, and then the title, and then the city, and so on. There is different styles. Make sure that you are on the right, using the right style. You just ask your supervisor for that. And you can show your motivation on the subject also based on that. Use a reference management system. There is many softwares. Previously, there was a software called EndNote. Today, the most commonly used is Zotero, and I advise you to use Zotero. Well, I'm going to the end. This is it. This is the research proposal. It sounds maybe dense, very informative, but keep in mind that a research proposal does not need to be more than 5-6 pages. Sometimes the research proposal, a large European project, can be something like 25 pages. I'm talking about funding of millions. So in your case, all you need to have 5 pages, 6 pages describing and covering these issues, and just start to write and go through it. I give you some golden final tips. Structure your text. Make sure you have headings. Address every topic into a heading, structure, section, and write under it. Write short sentences. This is a very important thing. I figured out that in the French-speaking world, many students seem to write long sentences. Chop your sentence, keep it short, and follow your ideas, and don't make it complex. Just write. You can write down first in a sketch what ideas you want to communicate, and start to make them short sentences in a row. Use bullets. Bullets are very important because readers get bored when they find a full block of text. Try to make bullets to highlight the important topics. Provide images, charts. I already told you that you need a Gantt chart, an organizational chart, a study research design for the methodology. Try as maximum to have a kind of visual component. Don't make it exceed 30-40% of the proposal, so that the proposal is readable and accessible. And the keys to success are important, that you should assure that all relevant chapters of the proposal have been addressed accurately. The 10 themes that I described are addressed in detail. Be brief and concise as possible. You should support your information with empirical and proof. Try to have always statistics, numbers, references to cite your work. Write, don't hesitate, don't leave it till the end. If you have time, write a part of the proposal. Later on, write another part. So just keep writing. It's very easy. It's not a difficult thing. It's just that you have to get used to answer these kind of questions and do it and improvise it. Ask for peers. You can send it to colleagues, to a teaching assistant, to your supervisor. Don't hesitate to do that, to review the proposal and improve it. You can make draft 1, draft 2, until you are satisfied and willing to submit it. You can get expert help. You can talk to the audience people. You can talk to somebody who knows about the problem. Go consult a professor or any person who is professional. You should be well organized, synthesized, and don't forget that we are looking for a master student who has a critical appraisal, who can criticize, who can build up a case with new information. And this is very important by describing any controversies that you find in the objectives, include the evidence as possible, whether it's against or with your proposition. These are the key rules of success. I would like to go back just to remind you that this is very important, to respect the structure, cover it, go step by step until you have a good proposal. One thing I can promise you, if you developed and invested as much as possible time in writing your research proposal, your master thesis process will go as smooth as possible because you thought ahead about what you are going to do. So instead of going reactive and just reacting on everyday crisis, the simulation is not working, the interviews is not doing, you have here something that protects you. It makes you more certain, stable, and you see what are you going to do, and already you are certain that you can achieve your goal easier. So this is very important. I would like to thank you for your presentation. Here are my references, and don't hesitate to contact me. I'm looking for your proposals. Thank you very much.